The first time my father called me a thief, he did it in a courtroom packed with strangers. He stood there in a gray suit that probably cost more than my first apartment, pointed directly at me, and told the judge I had manipulated my dying grandmother into leaving me everything while my younger sister got nothing. I still remember the way his voice echoed off those wooden courtroom walls, calm and practiced, like he had rehearsed it in the mirror until he almost believed it himself. My mother sat beside him clutching a tissue against perfectly smudged mascara, while Madison stared down at her lap like the fragile victim in some made-for-TV tragedy. And I just sat there listening to my own family describe me like I was a parasite they were finally exposing to the world. If you've ever had someone twist your kindness into something ugly, you probably already know how this story feels. And trust me, by the end of it, the silence in that courtroom was louder than anything my father ever said. The crazy part is that none of this started with money. That's what people always assume when families go to court against each other. They think it's greed, jealousy, entitlement. But this started years earlier in a narrow white house outside Columbus, Ohio, where everything in my family revolved around my younger sister. Madison was the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately became the center of it. Blonde hair, bright smile, the kind of effortless charm that made teachers forgive late assignments, and neighbors call her sweetheart even when she ignored them. My parents loved that about her. Actually, no, loved isn't the right word. They built their entire lives around protecting it. My father, Robert Carter, used to say Madison was special, which was family code for she could do no wrong. When she crashed her first car at 17, my parents blamed the rain. When she dropped out of college after one semester, they blamed the professors. When she maxed out 3 credit cards before turning 26, somehow that became everyone else's problem too, especially mine. I was the opposite of Madison in every possible way. Quiet, careful, predictable. The kind of daughter parents brag about to their friends, but somehow never actually notice at home. I worked 2 jobs through college, paid my own rent, never asked anyone for anything. And maybe that was my mistake? Because once a family decides you're the strong one, they stop caring whether you're breaking underneath it all. The only person who ever really saw me was my grandmother Eleanor. She lived alone in a small brick house about 40 minutes outside the city, the kind with wind chimes on the porch and faded blue shutters that hadn't been painted in years. Every Sunday afternoon, I drove out there with groceries and helped her around the house while Madison somehow always had other plans. Looking back now, I think Grandma noticed things none of us realized yet. The favoritism, the manipulation, the way my parents slowly trained me to believe my needs mattered less than everyone else's. About 3 months before she died, she looked at me across her tiny kitchen table and said something that still keeps me awake some nights. "Emily," she whispered softly, wrapping both hands around her coffee mug, "when people get desperate, they stop hiding who they really are." At the time, I thought she was talking about herself. I had no idea she was warning me about my own family. And I definitely had no idea that hidden inside her hallway closet was something that would eventually make a judge stop my father mid-sentence. After Grandma said that, I started noticing things I had ignored for years. The little pauses when my parents talked about money around Madison, the way my father suddenly became interested in Grandma's health after barely visiting her for almost a decade. Even Madison began showing up at the house more often. always carrying store-bought flowers that still had the price tags tucked beneath the plastic wrapping. Grandma noticed it too. She never said it directly, but I could see it in the way her smile tightened whenever Madison walked into the room pretending to be affectionate. One rainy Sunday in November, I found Grandma sitting alone at her kitchen table staring at a stack of papers spread neatly beside her coffee cup. Her reading glasses rested low on her nose, and the room smelled faintly like cinnamon candles and old books. "You're early," she said softly without looking up. I set the grocery bags down on the counter. Traffic was lighter than usual. She nodded absently, then slid the papers into a manila folder so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. Something about that tiny movement made my stomach tighten. "Everything okay?" I asked. For a second, she just stared at me, not through me. At me. Like she was trying to decide whether I was ready to know something that couldn't be taken back once spoken out loud. Then she sighed and reached for her mug with slightly trembling hands. "Your father came by yesterday." That caught me off guard immediately. My father hated driving out there. He used to complain the house smelled old and made him feel depressed. "What did he want?" I asked carefully. Grandma gave a humorless little laugh. What people usually want when they suddenly remember an old woman exists. I stayed quiet. He asked questions. She continued. About the house. About my accounts. About what happens after I'm gone. My chest tightened so fast it almost hurt. "Grandma and Madison," she interrupted gently, "spent 40 minutes explaining how difficult her life has become." There it was. The real reason. Again. Always Madison. I sat down across from her, suddenly exhausted in a way. I couldn't explain. "You do not owe anyone anything," I said quietly. Grandma smiled at me then. But it was the kind of smile people wear when they already know something painful is coming. "That's exactly what upset your father." The rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows, while the old clock above the stove ticked loud enough to feel uncomfortable. Then Grandma reached beside her chair and lifted a small wooden box onto the table between us. Dark walnut. Brass corners. Small enough to fit in my lap. "If anything happens," she said carefully, "you keep this." I frowned immediately. "What do you mean if anything happens?" "Emily," her voice dropped lower, "listen to me very carefully." Every instinct in my body suddenly screamed that something was wrong. She leaned closer across the table, her expression turning sharper than I had seen in years. "There are people in this family who believe kindness makes you weak. Promise me you won't prove them right." Before I could answer, headlights swept across the front window. A car door slammed outside. Grandma looked toward the driveway, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw genuine fear move across her face. Then she whispered 4 words that made my blood run cold. They were not invited. The front door opened before I could even stand up from the table. My father walked in first without knocking, bringing cold November air and the sharp smell of rain inside with him. Madison followed close behind, wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Grandma's monthly electric bill. Neither of them looked surprised to see me there. That bothered me immediately. My father gave me one quick glance, then focused entirely on Grandma, like I wasn't even part of the room. "We called earlier," he said casually, removing his wet gloves. "You didn't answer." Grandma's expression hardened in a way I had never seen before. "That usually means I do not want visitors." Madison forced a soft laugh and stepped farther into the kitchen, carrying another bouquet of grocery store flowers. Bright yellow daisies this time. Cheap flowers pretending to look cheerful. Grandma, you make it sound so dramatic. She kissed the side of Grandma's head lightly, but even that looked rehearsed somehow. Like she had watched people do it in movies instead of meaning it naturally. I noticed my father's eyes immediately drift toward the manila folder sitting near Grandma's elbow. He noticed it too. Slowly, he pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "We should probably have a realistic conversation," he said. That sentence alone made the room feel smaller. Grandma folded her hands together calmly. "About the future." Madison sat beside him, crossing her legs elegantly. "Dad is just worried about you." I almost laughed at that. My father had ignored Grandma's birthday 3 years in a row, but suddenly he was concerned about her future. Grandma stayed silent. My father leaned back slightly, lowering his voice into that measured tone he used whenever he wanted to sound reasonable while saying something cruel. "Madison is struggling." There it was again. Always the same opening line before they asked someone else to sacrifice for her. "The divorce has been difficult," he continued. "And with her financial situation, my financial situation would not exist if Trevor had not emptied our accounts." Madison interrupted softly, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. I watched Grandma carefully. She wasn't buying it. Not completely, but I could see something else in her face too. Exhaustion. The kind that comes from realizing the people you raised only show tenderness when they smell opportunity nearby. My father slid a stack of papers across the table. "We think it would make sense to simplify things now instead of later." Grandma didn't touch the papers. Neither did I. The rain outside had started falling harder against the windows, soft but relentless. "Simplify what?" Grandma asked quietly. My father exchanged a quick look with Madison before answering. "The house. The accounts. The estate?" The word estate landed in the room like something rotten. Madison reached over and placed her hand dramatically over Grandma's wrist. "We just want to make sure everything stays in the family." That almost broke me because I finally understood what they were really saying. In their minds, I was not family anymore. Not the kind that counted. Grandma slowly removed her hand from beneath Madison's fingers. "Emily has been family every Sunday for the last 7 years," she said evenly. "Interesting that all of you remembered me at the same time my doctor started using the word terminal." Silence swallowed the room instantly. Madison's face lost color. My father stiffened slightly, caught off guard for the first time all evening. I turned toward Grandma so quickly my chair scraped against the kitchen floor. "Terminal," I whispered. Grandma looked at me then, and the sadness in her eyes hit harder than panic ever could. "I was going to tell you after Thanksgiving," she said softly. Then my father did something that made my stomach drop completely. Instead of reacting like a son hearing devastating news, he reached slowly toward the papers again and said, almost impatiently, "That is exactly why we need to handle the signatures tonight." The room went so quiet after my father said that. I could hear the old refrigerator humming behind me. Not one person reacted the way normal people should when hearing someone they supposedly loved was dying. No shock. No grief. No tears. Just paperwork sitting on a kitchen table beside a cooling cup of coffee. Grandma stared at him for several long seconds, like she was finally seeing a stranger wearing her son's face. "Tonight," she repeated softly. My father exhaled impatiently and tapped the stack of papers with 2 fingers. "Mother, this does not have to become emotional." Madison shifted uncomfortably beside him, though not enough to stop him. "Dad just means we should avoid complications later," she added carefully. Complications. That was the word they used for a woman's entire life. Her house, her memories, her savings, her independence, reduced to paperwork they wanted, completed before the clock ran out. Something inside me snapped quietly, then, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for me to finally understand that my family had crossed a line they could never uncross. "She just told you she is terminal," I said slowly, barely recognizing my own voice. My father looked at me with that familiar expression he had worn my entire childhood whenever I made things inconvenient. And that is exactly why practical decisions matter. Grandma suddenly pushed her chair back from the table. The sharp scrape against the hardwood floor made everyone flinch slightly. She stood carefully, one hand resting against the counter for balance, but there was nothing weak in her voice anymore. "You came here tonight because you thought I was scared enough to surrender." Madison's face tightened immediately. "Grandma, nobody is trying to pressure you." "No." Grandma asked quietly. "Then why are there legal transfer forms sitting in my kitchen?" I looked down at the documents for the first time. My stomach dropped. Property transfer agreements, account authorizations, durable power of attorney paperwork already partially filled out with Madison's name typed neatly across the top. My father noticed me reading and calmly folded his hands together like this was all perfectly reasonable. "We are trying to protect family assets." Family assets. The phrase sounded cold enough to belong inside a corporate boardroom instead of a grandmother's kitchen. Grandma gave a bitter little laugh under her breath. "Interesting," she said, "because Emily has been the only family asset keeping this house running for years." Madison's composure cracked first. "Why does everything always become about Emily?" she snapped suddenly. "You act like she is some kind of saint just because she comes over here every weekend." "Madison," my father warned quietly, but she was already unraveling. "No, seriously," she continued, standing now too. "Do you have any idea how hard things have been for me?" Her mascara had started smudging slightly beneath her eyes. But unlike Mom's performance in court years later, these tears looked dangerously real. I lost everything in that divorce. Grandma's expressions softened for barely a second before hardening again. And whose fault was that? Madison froze. Completely froze. The silence afterward felt heavy enough to bend the walls inward. I looked between them, confused by the sudden shift in the room. My father stood up immediately. "That is not relevant." But Grandma ignored him entirely. She kept staring directly at Madison with a sadness that almost looked like disappointment, layered over something darker. "Have you ever told Emily what really happened to Trevor's money?" she asked quietly. Madison's face drained white, so fast it frightened me. My father stepped forward instantly. "Mother." But Grandma did not stop. Or should I? Madison looked like someone had pulled the floor out from underneath her. Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. My father stepped between us so quickly it almost felt instinctive, like he had rehearsed protecting her his entire life. "That is enough," he said sharply. Grandma did not even blink. No, she replied calmly. I think we are finally at the point where honesty matters. I felt my heartbeat thudding hard enough to hear inside my ears. Something was happening beneath the surface of this family conversation. Something old and ugly that everyone except me already understood. Madison grabbed her purse from the chair beside her with trembling hands. Grandma, please, she whispered. Not in front of Emily. That sentence hit harder than it should have. Not because of what it meant, but because of what it revealed. They had all been standing in front of me my entire life while hiding things they assumed I either could not handle or did not deserve to know. Grandma slowly sat back down at the table, exhaustion creeping into her shoulders now. For a moment, she looked every bit her age. Emily deserves the truth more than anyone, she said quietly. My father rubbed one hand across his jaw, pacing once near the sink before stopping. Trevor manipulated Madison financially. He said carefully, almost too carefully. That marriage destroyed her. Grandma let out a soft breath through her nose. Interesting revision of history. Madison suddenly snapped. Why are you doing this? She cried. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks now. You have always loved Emily more. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Grandma's face changed instantly. Not angry. Heartbroken. No, she said softly. I simply expected more from you. Madison looked away first. That told me everything. The old kitchen clock ticked loudly while rain continued sliding down the dark windows outside. Then Grandma reached toward the manila folder and slowly opened it. 3 years ago, she began quietly, Trevor came here alone. Madison froze again. My father closed his eyes briefly, like he already knew where this was going. He told me he discovered large withdrawals from their joint accounts. Grandma continued, thousands of dollars disappearing every month. I looked toward Madison automatically, but she would not meet my eyes. Trevor thought she was gambling. Grandma said, she was not. My stomach tightened. Then where did the money go? I asked softly. Nobody answered immediately. Grandma's expression darkened with something close to pity. Your father's business. The room tilted for a second. I actually thought I misheard her. My father straightened immediately. Mother, do not distort this. Distort. Grandma repeated. Robert, you borrowed nearly $80,000 through Madison because the bank refused your loan application. My father's silence was worse than denial. Madison started crying harder now, wiping at her face frantically. I was trying to help him, she whispered. He said the business would recover. Suddenly, dozens of strange memories clicked into place at once. The second mortgage, the tense phone calls, Dad selling his boat out of nowhere, Mom pretending everything was normal during Christmas while collectors kept calling the house. My father had not been protecting Madison all these years. Madison had been protecting him. And somehow, they had both decided I was the easiest person to sacrifice when the consequences finally caught up with them. So, this is not about helping Madison, I said slowly. Feeling something cold settle deep in my chest. You need Grandma's estate because Dad is broke. My father finally looked directly at me then. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear behind his eyes instead of control. But before he could answer, Grandma reached for the small wooden box beside her chair and slid it across the table toward me. Open it, she said quietly. Now? My hands felt strangely numb as I pulled the wooden box closer across the table. The brass corners were worn smooth with age, and for one irrational second, I remembered being 8 years old sitting on Grandma's living room carpet while she kept old family photos inside it. Back then, it had smelled faintly like lavender and cedar. Now it felt heavier than it should have, like the box itself understood what was about to happen. "Mother," my father said sharply, stepping forward. "This is unnecessary." Grandma never took her eyes off me. "Open it." The room had turned painfully still. Even Madison stopped crying long enough to stare at the box in my hands. I slowly lifted the latch. Inside were 3 things. A sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Grandma's shaky handwriting. A silver key taped beneath the lid, and a small black USB drive resting carefully on top of several folded documents. My father's entire expression changed the second he saw the USB. It happened fast, almost too fast to catch. But once you saw fear on someone's face, you could never unsee it. "What is that?" I asked quietly. Grandma leaned back in her chair, looking suddenly exhausted. "Insurance," she said. My father moved toward the table immediately. "Emily, give me that." His voice came out harder than before, stripped of the calm control he usually hid behind. I instinctively pulled the box closer to my chest. Madison stood up too now, panic spreading visibly across her face. "Grandma, please," she whispered. "You said you would not. I said I would not if Robert stopped." The silence after that sentence felt suffocating. My father looked at her with open disbelief. "You recorded me?" he asked quietly. Grandma's expression did not change. "No, Robert. You recorded yourself." I felt cold all over. My father took another step closer to me, lowering his voice, like he was trying to regain control before everything completely slipped away. "Emily, whatever she told you tonight is being exaggerated." "Exaggerated," Grandma repeated softly. "You forged financial disclosures. Robert." Madison let out a shaky breath. "Dad," he ignored her completely. "The business was collapsing," he snapped suddenly. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if the bank called those loans?" His face had gone red. Now, in years of pressure, finally cracking through the polished image he spent his whole life protecting. "We would have lost everything." "You already did," Grandma said quietly. The rain outside had become a full storm now, wind rattling faintly against the windows while thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. The whole house suddenly felt too small to contain everything unraveling inside it. My father pointed directly at the box in my hands. "That drive does not prove anything," but the way he said it told me he already knew exactly what was on it. My stomach twisted painfully. "Emily," Madison said softly, finally looking at me directly again. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "Please do not watch it." That scared me more than anything else had tonight. Because Madison had spent her entire life manipulating sympathy like breathing. But this did not feel manipulative anymore. This felt like genuine fear. I looked down at the sealed envelope with my name written across the front. My fingers trembled slightly as I slid one beneath the flap. Then Grandma suddenly spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now, before you open that letter," she said carefully, "there is something about your mother you do not know." The storm outside cracked so loudly the windows trembled, but nobody in that kitchen moved. My hand stayed frozen over the envelope while every nerve in my body screamed that whatever came next was going to split my life into before and after. Grandma looked weaker now, pale beneath the yellow kitchen light, but her eyes stayed locked on mine with terrifying clarity. "Your mother is not who you think she is," she said softly. I frowned immediately. "What does that mean?" My father answered before she could. "Mother, stop." It was the first time all night his voice carried actual panic instead of anger. Grandma ignored him completely. "Emily," she whispered, "your mother knew about the money years ago." My chest tightened. "What money?" "The accounts Robert borrowed against the debt. The forged disclosures. She knew all of it." I looked toward Mom automatically. Until that moment, she had barely spoken all evening. Sitting quietly beside the window, with both hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee. She always did that in our family. Stayed quiet. Stayed agreeable. Like silence could protect her from responsibility. But now she looked smaller somehow. Fragile. Guilty. "Mom?" I asked carefully. She would not meet my eyes. My father stepped forward immediately. "Your mother had nothing to do with this." Grandma's voice sharpened. "That is not true." The room exploded after that. "Enough." My father shouted, slamming his hand against the table so hard the coffee cups rattled. Madison flinched violently beside him. I had never seen him lose control like this before. Not openly. Not where everyone could see it. "You are sick," he snapped at Grandma. "You are confused and making reckless accusations." Grandma stared at him with heartbreaking calm. "No, Robert. I am dying. That is why I finally stopped protecting you." Silence crashed into the room again. My father looked like someone had punched the air out of his lungs. Then Mom suddenly started crying. Not dramatic tears. Not Madison's polished kind. These sounded raw and exhausted, like years of fear breaking apart all at once. "I told you this would happen," she whispered to him. My father turned toward her so fast it frightened me. "Claire." "No," she said shakily, wiping at her face. "No more." My entire body went cold. "Mum," I whispered, barely able to breathe now. "What is happening?" She finally looked at me then, and I swear that hurt more than anything else tonight because for the first time in my life, my mother looked ashamed to be seen by me. "The business collapsed almost 4 years ago," she admitted quietly. "Your father hid it from everyone." Madison closed her eyes tightly like she could disappear if she stayed still enough. "The loans, the credit lines, the second mortgage, none of it was enough." My father looked furious now, but beneath the anger was something worse. Defeat. "We were trying to survive." "Himuro?" "So you used Madison," I said slowly. Mom nodded through tears. "And when that failed, my voice cracked before I could stop it." Grandma finished the sentence for her. "They decided your inheritance was next." The words hit the room like shattered glass. Suddenly, every birthday forgotten, every sacrifice expected, every moment I was told to be understanding rearranged itself into one ugly truth. I was never the strong daughter they admired. I was the backup plan they planned to drain when everything else collapsed. Madison started sobbing openly now. I never wanted it to go this far, she whispered. Grandma looked at her sadly. But you still let it happen. Then I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter and one photograph. I unfolded the picture first, and the second I saw it, my knees nearly gave out beneath me. Because standing beside my father in that photo, smiling in front of a bank office dated 3 years earlier, was the attorney now representing them in court. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The storm outside had started to fade into a soft, steady rain, but inside Grandma's kitchen, the silence felt heavier than everything that had exploded only minutes earlier. I stared down at the photograph in my trembling hands. My father stood beside Attorney Daniel Mercer in front of a downtown bank office, both smiling stiffly at the camera, like businessmen closing a deal. The date printed in the corner was from 3 years ago, almost exactly when the missing money had started disappearing. Suddenly, the courtroom from years later made horrifying sense. The same attorney accusing me of manipulating Grandma had been connected to my father long before any lawsuit existed. "You planned this," I whispered without looking up. My father sank slowly into one of the kitchen chairs, like his body could no longer hold itself upright. He looked older now. Not older in years, but in damage. The polished confidence he carried his entire life had cracked wide open, leaving behind a tired man drowning beneath consequences he could no longer control. "It was never supposed to become this," he said quietly. Grandma gave a faint, exhausted laugh. That is what people always say after they destroy something. Madison had stopped crying by then. She sat motionless near the window, staring out at the wet darkness beyond the glass like she was trying to disappear into it. For the first time in my life, she did not look like the golden child, everyone protected. She looked lost. Small. Human. Mom wiped her face carefully with the sleeve of her cardigan before speaking again. "Your father thought he could fix everything if he bought enough time," she said softly. "At first it was only temporary loans. Then more debt. Then lies." I folded the photograph back into the envelope with shaking hands, and nobody thought I deserved to know. Mom looked down immediately. That answer hurt more than words. Grandma reached for her mug, but her hands trembled badly enough that I moved instinctively to help her. She smiled faintly as I steadied the cup for her. "You were the only one who never asked me for anything," she whispered. The simplicity of that sentence nearly broke me. My father rubbed both hands across his face slowly. "I was trying to save this family." "No," Grandma replied gently. "You were trying to save your pride." Another silence settled over the room after that. Softer this time. Not explosive. Just tired. Like everyone finally understood, there was no version of this night that ended without damage. I looked around the kitchen that had held so many Sunday dinners, birthday cakes, cheap coffee conversations, and quiet moments with Grandma over the years. It suddenly felt strange realizing a family could collapse without shouting, without slammed doors, without dramatic endings. Sometimes it simply unraveled one secret at a time until nothing familiar remained. Madison finally spoke without turning around. "Trevor left because he found the transfers," she said quietly. "He thought I cared more about protecting Dad than protecting us." Her voice cracked hard on the last word. Maybe he was right? Grandma closed her eyes briefly, like that confession cost her something to hear. Then she opened them again and looked directly at me. "The letter explains everything else," she said softly. I glanced back down at the folded pages still resting inside the envelope. Until then, I had barely noticed the second sheet beneath the photograph. My name was written across the top in Grandma's careful handwriting. And underneath it, one sentence immediately stood out enough to stop my breathing cold. "Emily, if you are reading this, it means your father has already decided to take you to court." My hands shook as I unfolded the letter completely. The paper was soft at the edges, like Grandma had read it over many times before sealing it away. The kitchen stayed silent except for the rain tapping gently against the windows. Now, quieter than before. Almost exhausted, after the storm, I started reading slowly. "Emily, if you are reading this, it means your father has already decided to take you to court. I prayed he would not. I hoped somewhere beneath all his fear and pride, he would remember you are his daughter before you are a solution to his problems." I had to stop for a second because the words blurred together through tears I did not even realize were falling. Across the table, my father stared down at his hands without speaking. Grandma continued watching me carefully, her expression carrying that same painful understanding she always seemed to have before anyone else did. I kept reading. "The USB contains recordings of conversations Robert does not know I saved, including the day he asked me to transfer everything into Madison's name and suggested Emily would eventually surrender anyway, because she always tries to keep the peace." My chest tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. That line destroyed me more than the lies, more than the lawsuit, more than the betrayal itself, because he was right. My entire life, I had been the daughter who stayed quiet to avoid making things harder for everyone else. The one who apologized first. The one who understood. The one who absorbed disappointment, like it was part of my job in the family. Grandma had seen it long before I did. People will call you selfish for finally protecting yourself. The letter continued. "Let them. Some families confuse love with access. They believe they are entitled to every piece of you simply because they raised you." Madison covered her face with both hands, then, shoulders trembling silently. Mom sat motionless beside her, staring at the old kitchen table like she could somehow rewind 20 years and become a different person. Even my father looked smaller now, emptied out by truths he could no longer outrun. Grandma reached for my hand carefully. Her skin felt paper-thin and warm. "I never wanted you to carry all of this alone," she whispered. I looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly understood the exhaustion behind her eyes. These past few years, she had been trying to hold this family together while quietly preparing for the moment it finally broke apart. A week later, I met with an attorney on my own, not Daniel Mercer. Someone entirely separate. By the time the lawsuit officially reached court months later, the recordings, the financial documents, and the conflict of interest involving Mercer had already begun unraveling everything my father tried to build against me. And when the judge stopped him, mid-sentence that morning in court, it was not victory, I felt. Not really. It felt more like grief finally losing its disguise. Grandma passed away 3 months after that night in the kitchen. The last time I saw her, we sat together on her porch, wrapped in blankets, while wind chimes moved softly above us in the cold evening air. She smiled at me and said something I think about almost every day now. "You can love people deeply and still refuse to let them destroy you. The house is mine now. I still drive out there every Sunday morning out of habit. Sometimes I make coffee and sit alone at her kitchen table listening to the old clock tick above the stove. Thinking about how quietly families can fall apart and how strangely peaceful honesty feels after years of pretending. Madison calls occasionally, not for money anymore, just to talk. Mom writes letters she never used to send. My father has not apologized, at least not directly, but the silence between us no longer feels angry. It feels tired, human. And sometimes I wonder how many other people have sat in rooms like that, slowly realizing the hardest thing about betrayal is that it rarely comes from strangers. It comes from people who once knew exactly how to make you feel safe.